All right, welcome ladies and gentlemen. Chris Waters here on the GameSpot stage. Super excited for an extra long preview demo of Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor. And joining me on stage, dude, I have totally just forgotten your name. In the long time we've had to talk together and like hang out, I feel so bad. It's not Talion. It's Michael DePlatter from Monolith Studios and Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor. Really impressive showing yesterday during the press conferences. Nominated for a GameSpot Best of E3 2014 award. And, you know, you're trotting the game out, getting people to see real solid demos of it now in action. How's it feel to have it out there?
I think, it's fantastic. It's amazing. And what's really exciting, and I think, you know, a bit different, it's every single time we do a demo, it's different. So, like, we literally can't show it the same way twice if we wanted to. So
that must make your demoing job a little bit nicer, you know?
Yeah.
Some new stuff cropping up every time.
Especially, like, you know, day one it's fine, but by day three, like, it's really going to be very, very different from having to do the same thing 100 times. It's very cool.
All right, well, we've got a long demo to play through, so let's just get right into it. And, Michael, why don't you set the stage for us? Where is Talion at this point in the game, and what's his goal?
So the game takes place. It's set in between The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings.
Okay.
But kind of like both of them, it's kind of a standalone story in its own right. So at the end of The Hobbit, Sauron gets defeated by the White Council. He gets driven out of his fortress of Dol Guldur, and he returns to Mordor.
Yeah.
But he's been away from there for 2,000 years. And over that time, Gondor's been occupying Mordor. So basically, it's kind of the night Sauron comes home. And that's where our game's actually going to begin.
Hey, guys, I'm back!
Yeah.
Oh, crap. Dark Lord is back on the scene. It's going to crap up the whole place.
And so that's where we begin our game. And at that moment, when he returns, Gondor's been guarding these things for 2 millennia, and obviously over that time, with not as much going on, the guard's fallen off. It's down to a skeleton crew, and you're Talion, you're one of those rangers, and when Sauron returns, you're slaughtered along with your family, along with the other rangers on the gates. But Sauron's return also awakens this other ancient spirit who has a very, very deep tie to Middle-earth lore, to the Rings of Power, and a very ancient grudge against Sauron. And then that spirit is awakened and resurrects Talion, and then together the two of you go deep behind enemy lines and kind of take the fight to Sauron.
Back into the realm you sort of once guarded and the fortifications you once inhabited, now being turned to Sauron's use as he builds his army in Mordor.
Yeah, and then, of course, 60 years later, we're going to see them as the Black Gates of Mordor. They're going to be garrisoned, but that's a long way in the future, and Sauron's got a lot of work to do to build his forces up. So, you know, you can make a big difference to the fate of Middle-earth by how much you can get behind enemy lines and really mess with his plans.
Every last orc counts, man. And so this is, in a way, it's you got a little bit of an origin story for Sauron. You know, not his origin vis-a-vis his Lord of the Rings incarnation, but you're sort of telling part of his story in addition to Talion's story.
Yeah, that's something we're really excited about. You know, there's a number of different characters from the books that we bring in, but I think the one we are really excited about developing is Sauron, because a lot of really what you see in The Hobbit is the necromancer, so he's a very distant sort of character, and the same in Lord of the Rings. He's pretty abstract as the great eye on the Tower of Barad-dûr. We get a few little references to him. Gollum refers to the Black Hand of Sauron, but we really don't get to develop him as a character, and Tolkien actually put a lot more into him as a character, into his background, into his history, and in particular, one of the intriguing things about him is the Rings of Power. He worked together very closely with the elves on that, so he wasn't always this just total incarnation of evil. There's enough depth and nuance and, you know, to actually deceive the elves and work with them. So we get to explore a lot of his backstory and more of his motivations.
That whole
as well.
Ring of Power storyline is so much about the corruption of people and the creation of this evil, as opposed to, you know, we just dug up this horrible evil from deep beneath the mountain. It's, no, we sort of wrought this evil ourselves in the hearts of man over the course of millennia almost. And so we got a little glimpse of sort of a setup there, and now we're right into it. And branding war chiefs seems to be the task at hand.
So, yeah, what we've seen, basically the character we just met is Marwyn. And She's a queen who's deep behind enemy lines in Mordor. She's the leader of basically one of the sort of the holdouts of Gondor's kingdom that were in there. And she's drawn you deeper into Mordor. 2 reasons. One, to help the resistance there. And secondly, to learn more about the identity and the mysteries and the power of this Wraith. And this is sort of the key to how our game works a bit, because she's given us our story objective. We can do more than just hunt down and kill and assassinate our enemies. We can bend them to our will. We can actually, make an army behind enemy lines. But kind of what's important is that how we go about doing that is going to be completely different for every play. Like, you're really free in how you approach
and here
that goal.
Here we see one of those inflection points where you see where the player experience is going to diverge, because you got this whole rogues gallery of war chiefs, and you're picking the ones to target?
Yeah, exactly. So there's 2 things. One, I mean, we're obviously shortcutting things here to show you here today.
Yeah.
In the real game, there's a big chance that a number of these guys that are the leaders and the war chiefs are going to be people you've met 2, 3, 4 times before. They might have started as a sort of a lowly guard as an archer on a tower, and they've fought and battled and backstabbed their way up to here. So your archvillain, your boss, can be completely unique to your game. Some of them you mightn't have met before, but they'll be different as well. But every single time you get a playthrough, they'll be different. And so, here, for example, this guy, the Executioner, it's not just them waiting in the world for you. They're out there actually living in the living world. They're hunting you as you're hunting them. They're actually going on missions. They're battling against each other to work their way up.
They're gaining experience and getting more powerful as you do.
Yeah, so, and that's the thing. It's partly about, we're really trying to create villains here, which is partly about making them all play differently, because they have different strengths and weaknesses, but partly about them, sort of having different personalities and identities. We're really trying to make super villains, basically. And, they have their own origin stories, all of which they have scars that you've left on them. And the thing that really pulls it together is they remember. So it's really a way of putting the player at the center of the living world, because if you've done something awesome, whether it's ruined this guy's feast or saved him from certain death at an execution or turned up on his greatest fear, whether that's a monster or whatever, he's going to remember that and respond to it, and his personality adapts to that as well. He can become either terrified or enraged by the things you've done to him. So it really plays out in a meaningful way for the gameplay.
And so it's interesting, you're talking a lot about how these villains and their personalities change, but I was reading a preview we have up on GameSpot written by Randolph Ramsey when he got to play the game, and what struck me is how his sort of feeling towards the villains evolved, because you say you can encounter these guys a few times. His encounter was he got cocky. He went into a melee. This lowly orc killed him. He respawned, but when you come back into the world, time hasn't stopped. You come back into the world that thinks you're dead and that you got killed, and so that orc was promoted to captain. And so he came back and he's like, you know what, I'm going to go after that guy. And he tried to go after that guy and he blew it again, and so that orc got promoted even more. And so the Nemesis building was on his side as well as in the game, and that was fascinating to me. I
mean, really, there are a few inspirations for that. One is the sort of grudges you can get against another player in multiplayer.
Sure.
So, actually making AIs and NPCs that double down on that same feeling that you are, building up relationships with them. And secondly, that they're remembering you. We want to create the feeling that they feel like that as well.
Yeah.
And then also, so often, I think one of the, often one of the least fun things to do in a game is to die. Because if you die, usually what that means is, okay, you get to go back and do the same thing you just did and failed at.
Yeah.
Which maybe wasn't fun, maybe it was, but you've got to try that in order to proceed. And very much in a way that's in line with how we see the ring wraiths in the films and and that ability to resurrect. We wanted to turn death into an opportunity. And that works in a few ways. One, by, as you said, by killing you. That obviously gives them a lot of status. They've just taken down what is, from their point of view, the biggest villain of Mordor. So, that moves them up in Orc society. They're heroes to their mates, so they move up. But secondly, it creates that opportunity for vengeance and for you to hunt them and build your legend as well.
Absolutely. Now, I want to get into sort of some of the combat mechanics we're seeing play out here, but I'm taking your questions via Twitter, folks. So tweet them to me. My handle is CTWaters. That's Waters with 2 T's. And use the hashtag GameSpotE3. Poison Monkey 1 wants to know, can you set rival or, sort of turned armies against each other in your sort of orchestrations and manipulations?
Yes. So we have, basically, we didn't want to overcomplicate it. So in the sense there's really 2 factions. There's Sauron's army, and then there's the guys you bend to your will. I mean, to some extent, it's like Saruman. His way that he believes to take down Sauron is to fight force with force and to build an army of Uruk in order to take on the Dark Lord. So, it's similar. So we don't have multiple sort of sub-factions within that. But once you actually dominate and bend one of these guys to your will, you can absolutely continue to increase them in power. So you can send them on missions to prove themselves. You can make them fight duels against other orcs. Once they battle all the way up to actually become a war chief, you can set rival war chiefs against each other. They'll have, large-scale battles like we see in Cirith Ungol, where they'll actually bring their own bodyguard. So you truly can build up and farm and build your army, and then ultimately take those guys that you've built and farmed up and leveled up against your ultimate enemy, which are these black captains, and they're sort of our tentpole villains, the guys that are personally responsible for your death and the death of your family at the start of the game. So it kind of escalates, but we really want to carry that through, that you build your army behind enemy lines and you really do take that against the Dark Lord.
Very cool, Michael. So the overarching story, as you alluded to there, is one of vengeance. This is a revenge-fueled tale. This is not a guy trying to, he's not. His primary goal isn't preserve the last light that remains or like fight against the oncoming tide. Like that's part of it.
Yep.
But also, personal revenge is a huge part of that, and that's not a narrative that you see terribly often in Tolkien lore. So, I mean, how is it to sort of weave that into this world, the story you guys are writing, that revenge-fueled, plot into the greater fiction?
Yeah, that's a really good question. One of the things that's amazing about Tolkien is he does cover this incredible spectrum of tones, and in some way the deeper you go back into the lore, into the First Age, into the Second Age, so some of those really epic heroes, people like Beren, people like Fëanor, these sort of guys actually do start off driven by revenge, and they really do start out as bad guys, as bandits, almost as criminals.
Really?
And I think some of that earlier lore is really closer to the kind of myths that inspired Tolkien as well. These myths like Beowulf and these Nordic myths that are sort of pretty dark. I think in that sense, we are sort of very, very true to and authentic to Tolkien. Plus, we're also very much in line with those heroes like Boromir. Boromir is not someone who was conflicted about the idea that, or Saruman for that matter, who's conflicted about the idea that the way to take down darkness is with ruthlessness.
By any means necessary, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And Tolkien's obviously pretty clear that ultimately that's not necessarily the way that you're going to win or be victorious. But Boromir is interesting because ultimately he is a heroic character because he was ready to sacrifice himself, ready to actually doom himself for what he perceived was the greater good. So, that's a journey and an arc that we're really interested in exploring as well.
All right. Well, I want to blaze through some of these questions from Twitter. We are getting a ton of them. Thank you, folks, for sending them in. Keep them coming. So, some of these you're probably not going to be able to answer, but I'm going to throw them at you anyway.
I'll do my best.
Andrew Barnett wondering, are any members of the Fellowship going to appear in the game?
Not directly. So, we very much like The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, we want characters who are, important to the lore to appear when it's appropriate, but we sort of didn't want the Forrest Gump just having them cameo in there for the sake of it. So there certainly are characters from Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit that appear.
In the similar vein, Zahar wants to know, are we going to see some elves in the game? I mean, obviously it's a very Orcan sort of man-heavy setting.
Yep.
But those aren't the only 2 races in Middle-earth.
We're going to see multiple races, including elves, in some really important roles.
All right. We've got questions about the open world. James Cole wants to know, sort of, you know, are you just running roughshod over the plains of Gorgoroth here? Like, how far and wide can you sort of span in the open world?
So Mordor is kind of many hundreds of miles along each side.
Yeah.
So it's not continuous, you know, it's divided into regions. So
Sure.
the opening part of the game is around Gorgoroth, is around Udun, the Black Gates, Cirith Ungol, the Fortress of Durthang. So that's sort of a large open space there. And then what we're actually showing here, which is the Sea of Nirn, is another completely separate zone that you've traveled to sort of many hundreds of miles. So it's a number of distinct zones and areas.
All right, we've got questions from people who clearly have some Tolkien lore background.
Yep,
Curious about using the Silmarillion as source material, but pulling in any of that sort of world building stuff as well.
So yeah, that's a great question as well. So we have the rights to The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings and the appendices. And the thing is, within those, there's a huge amount of information and depth in regard to all of the history and characters of Middle-earth as well. So we really can draw on all of that deep history.
You guys have a lot to work with.
Yes.
Does it get a little daunting sometimes to like delve deep and just see the breadth of this world that Tolkien created?
I think it's almost like doing a historical story, historical fiction. It's like you're creating a world and a story in a real place.
Yeah.
And in the same way, if you're drawing on reality and history, it's big enough and expansive enough that you can tell your own story, so you're not restricted in that way. I almost can't imagine a type of story that you couldn't tell within Middle-earth. It's as big as World War II. Like,
It's
the
massive.
scope of it is huge.
So you guys got a significant research department over there at Monolith, huh?
Yeah, we got some pretty hardcore fans, and Middle-earth Enterprises are great, so we have a lot of people fact-checking. And the other one that's great is our Wikia site. The fans on there are so fantastic. Like, we can just, obviously there's threads in there breaking down, discussing everything, which is cool.
There you go, folks. You want to tip the scales in Middle-earth, Shadow of Mordor, get yourself into some deep Tolkien lore forums. All right, let's delve into combat proper, because we've been watching a lot of it. We haven't really talked about what we've been seeing sort of specifically in terms of mechanics. Actually, here's a choice moment that I think you're going to encounter more than once throughout the game. To kill or to dominate.
So this is actually, I haven't been watching exactly what's been going on, but we've got to a point where there's a war chief. He's down on his knees, he's defeated. We've got 2 choices. We could kill him at this point, and that's the end of it. And then we can go into some of our upgrades, which are our runes and how you actually customize your weapons. Or we can dominate. We can bend him to our will, so he actually becomes our minion. Your choice.
And obviously it's sort of one of these factors that affects the way it's gonna branch out. Are we calling for the kill?
Yeah,
let's
Are you giving
the
thumbs down? Thumbs down.
Eh.
There he goes.
All right, so you got to do a little work. Oh, there he goes. His head is flipping around. You guys.
His last words, but there's a nice rune we get. So, okay, so what happens then? He's eliminated. Bang. Oh, great. I hadn't been watching. So there was another, that executioner we met earlier. He's bent to our will. He was a bodyguard of that guy. So that space that's created allows our follower, our branded guy, to move up and take that position.
Move into the position of power.
And so that's one of the ways you can kind of take over the war chief, start to build your army. But now some other guys have turned up at this fight as well.
And so give us a little breakdown of the kind of UI elements, the on-screen indicators that are giving us the important information you're going to need to succeed in combat.
Yeah, so of course above his head, this guy that the life drinker.
Yep.
That's turned green. Basically, green in our game, that's a language for intel. Gathering intel, learning your enemy's strengths and weaknesses is really important. So there's enemies in the world who are worms, who have information. You can grab them, interrogate them to learn the strengths and weakness of these bosses. But if you want to get that information from one of the captains, one of the bosses, you got to break him down and weaken him first. So when that skull turns green, he's ready,
he's ready for you to
dominated.
Extract.
The crown and the blue we can see on the other guy that was round to the left. that shows he's ours. So that indicates that the power of the Wraith has dominated this guy as well.
Yeah, I saw that a second ago. You did a little Wraith mode, and it's sort of like the blue flash came over him, and it was that gaunt, skeletal, really freaky-looking Wraith face that we saw in Lord of the Rings movies. How much are you guys relying on or drawing from Peter Jackson's movies to influence the visual style of your game?
You know, I think... So we worked with those guys right from the beginning, and everything goes through them for the approvals, and so we really had that as a starting point. But one of the things everyone's been so encouraging on is, you know, don't make a movie game. Make the best possible game that you can make. And to be fair, you know, that's what the movies are. They're not just the book on screen. They're these amazing films. So we really wanted to take the inspiration from them of doing the best we can with this material in our medium. And so, yeah, I think it was a starting point, but I think we've sort of evolved into something that has its own flavor as well. But the power of the ring wraiths, whether it's in the books or the films, is the power of fear and domination and bending your enemies to your will. So that idea, that concept of what power means, whether it's a ring of power or whether it's the wraith, was absolutely the influence for what sort of power we can give you as the player to build your army behind enemy lines as well.
You guys didn't go the Tom Bombadil route, drawing your powers from nature and living in seclusion?
Tom Bombadil's awesome. He's one of my favorite characters. He's the one guy in the whole books that gets the ring and just tosses it in the air. He's the only thing in the whole books that's outside of all of this, you know?
Whatever.
Even Gandalf, Galadriel, they can't even take the ring for a second, so... He's pretty awesome. And the other quote I like about Tom Bombadil is, which Tolkien said was, even in a world of myth, you've got to have mysteries. You know, you've got to do something new. You've got to surprise people, and that's really important to us as well. You can't just. It would be so inauthentic to Tolkien to just rehash things people have seen before. It's really authentic to these stories that you do introduce something new that's still consistent and authentic to the canon.
Give some, you know, players people something new to discover within that world.
Exactly. You know, so the Wraith, as we interpret it, it's not exactly maybe as some things have been seen before, but it's completely authentic within what's possible within the lore. And I think the more people learn about it, you know, the cooler that's going to be as well.
All right, Mike, I'm going to dive into some more Twitter questions. This one I've been getting a lot from Starkiller, from Joel Evans, from any number of folks on Twitter, wondering about gameplay modes and specifically any kind of multiplayer.
The campaign is single player. We're really focused on the single player experience. But in terms of kind of social play and competitive play, we have a couple of things. We have some missions called vendettas. So because your enemies that you're creating are going to be so unique to you, if one of those guys kills you, you can actually create a side mission in your friend's game. Where they can go and hunt that guy down who killed you. They can achieve vengeance for you, and if you do, you know, you both get upgrades and rewards for doing that.
Oh, that's kind of a cool way to make that sort of play off that revenge plotline. Is like, avenge me, sending the Xbox message.
Yeah, which is nice, and you know the showdowns will reflect that and so on. And then the other thing, our challenge mode. We've sort of got a challenge mode that's quite unique to our Nemesis system as well. So it's a bit different difficulty levels. We have a version of Sauron's army. We have some really tough war chiefs we planted in there, some captains, and then you can basically, can you clear that without dying? It's like a hardcore mode. How fast can you do it? How many points can you get? And then we have leaderboards for that challenge mode as well.
Right on. So giving people a way to sort of take this combat system and take their own sort of unique character build that they've customized and really put it to work in a competitive way, you know, to sort of flaunt it over their friends, or at least try to take their friends' scores down.
And of course, the ability to share videos, and now I think there's going to be so many moments of that from our game that, you know, people are going to want to show to each other and share these really unique kind of boss fights that they're only going to see in their game.
Well, Michael, we're coming to the end of this demo time, and that means we have some good news and bad news. The bad news is, like, a ton of the questions people are asking about combat mechanics, about customization of your character loadout, about all those sort of stuff you guys were seeing pop up, about, you know, gaining little buffs and gaining skills. We didn't really get into that this demo. Fortunately, Middle-earth: Shadow of Mordor is going to be coming back to the GameSpot live stage shows every single day of E3, we're going to have a demo tomorrow and on Thursday. So keep an eye on the GameSpot schedule, see when that's coming along. Come on back, and we'll get to those questions, hopefully, because there's certainly a lot to talk about, as we found today, and the game is just looking really great, Michael.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Really pleased you could come on. Looking forward to seeing you in the coming days and learning more about Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor.
Thank you.
Cheers.